Hello again, kids. Now, today I wanted to do a recap. There seems to be a lot of scuttlebutt around these days going on about how Dean Strang and Jerry Buting had their hands tied. I want you guys to fully understand the set of circumstances that those two were coming up against and how awesome of a job they actually did. First and foremost, what I want you to understand is that when you're a defense attorney, especially in criminal trials, the odds of you actually getting your client set free are pretty slim. It's almost a guarantee that you're going to lose. It's just the nature of the beast. Primarily for several reasons. Most experts believe that one of the reasons why it's so hard to defend a client in this country, why it's so difficult to mount a defense, is because the jury is a jury of laymen. When they walk into that jury box, they already have this preconceived notion in their head of, well, the person must have done something or they must be guilty because otherwise why would they be charged? It's this innate trust that the public has in our judicial system that causes these things to be so difficult. Now, the fact is, kids, is that Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, their hands were tied from top to bottom. And this shit started from the very first day of the investigation. First of all, let's get one thing straight, kids. This was never, ever, ever a missing persons investigation. From day one, this was a murder investigation. There was never any missing persons protocol put into place. This was a homicide investigation from beginning to end. Part of the evidence that we have that supports that is the fact that Kratz was on site on November 3rd of 2005 at the Avery Salvage Yard. Now, I know that I've made a video on this before, and I've had some commenters tell me, so what, Casey? So the DA was there. Well, here's the thing, kids. That's not standard operating procedure anyway. But it becomes even more Twilight Zone when you realize that the supposed scene of the crime was in Manitowoc County, and yet a prosecutor from Calumet County was on site on the day of the discovery of the car. Why? That makes no sense, kids. The fact is that at that point they had only found her car at a salvage yard, which I've said it before and I'll say it a million other times. What better place to hide a vehicle of a person that you have murdered than a salvage yard? It's where I would put a vehicle. Quite frankly, if I were to kill somebody and I had their car that I needed to get rid of, I would put it at a salvage yard. I would just take it there in the dead of night and dump it. Because the chances of anybody figuring out that there's a missing person's vehicle on that site is slim to none. So why the fuck was a DA from a neighboring county on site on November 3rd of 2007? She wasn't even identified as dead yet. She was identified as missing, but not as dead. Now, if you really look at things about why was Kratz there on November 3rd, and you really look at the progression of events, you can see that pretty much the only explanation for Kratz being there on November 3rd is the Denny Motion. They were setting up the Denny Motion from day fucking one. Now, the Denny Motion is the primary reason why Strang and Buting were unable to defend Stephen Avery as well as they possibly could have. Because the Denny Motion tied their hands. Now, I've explained this before, and I'm going to explain this again. So, grab your notebooks, kids. Let's get started. The Denny Motion is supposed to be used in situations where there's so much forensic evidence that there is no other explanation than that the defendant committed the crime. The problem here is, kids, is that there is pretty much no forensic evidence that proves that Stephen Avery is guilty of Teresa Halbach's murder. None. No evidence that can be directly linked to him that is not suspiciously also linked to two dirty cops. The Denny Motion in this case was completely inappropriate. But What that did was that limited Strang and Buting's defense options from the get-go. Now, here's what a lot of people don't get. The Denny Motion was ordered, it was signed into order on July 10th of 2006. The trial didn't start until February 12th of 2007. That is 7 months before the trial started. The fuck? But here's where it gets really interesting, kids. If you think about it, you will realize the jury had no idea the Denny Motion was in play. Even if they heard the words Denny Motion or third-party liability, chances are they had no idea what that meant. But they did not know that the Denny Motion was in play. They had no clue. They were not sitting in that jury box when the Denny Motion arguments were heard and when it was ruled upon. So they had no clue, none whatsoever, that the Denny Motion was in play in this case. What that did was it limited Strang and Buting on everything that they were capable of doing. Now, what that basically means is Denny Motion prevented Strang and Buting from pointing out the lack of investigation and the investigatory bias in this case. Even if something wasn't covered by the Denny Motion, all Kratz had to do was object. Your Honor, that sounds an awful lot like third-party liability, and Willis would roll over and get his obligatory belly rub from the testicularly retracted DA. And he would do whatever Kratz wanted and he would sustain the objection. Okay, now kids, to explain what that means. When two lawyers are in the courtroom and one lawyer asks a question that the other lawyer does not like or feels could hurt his case or doesn't see the point of, he does what's called an objection. You stand up in the middle of the courtroom and say, objection, Your Honor, irrelevance. Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation. Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation. In this case, 90% of Kratz's objections involve the Denny Motion. Objection, Your Honor, that speaks to third-party liability. The jury doesn't fucking know what that means. Half of the fucking population wouldn't know what that means unless you explained it to them. What third-party liability means in this case is that anybody other than Steven Avery could have committed this crime. Now, this creates an issue because even if it didn't have anything to do with third-party liability, or even if it wasn't specifically covered under the Denny Motion, Kratz would still object, Willis would sustain, and then Dean Strang and Jerry Buting were prevented from asking the question, getting the question answered, or introducing the evidence. So the jury is only hearing evidence that Steven Avery committed this crime. They have no idea that there is other evidence that was never tested, never properly processed, or that there was any evidence at all of anybody other than Steven Avery committing this crime. Of course they're going to vote that he's guilty. They haven't been told about anybody else's possibilities here. They were not even told about the phone call. They were not told that there were fingerprints found on the car that were not Steven Avery's. They weren't told of this. They were not told of a lot. Go back through the court transcripts and read it, remembering that the Denny Motion is in play, and you'll see what I'm talking about. What this also did was this prevented Strang and Buting from introducing their own independent evidence from a private investigator. Now, I know everybody knows that Strang and Buting hired a private investigator. What I don't think anybody knows is that the evidence was attempted to be introduced into court, but the judge prevented it, citing the Denny Motion. All Kratz had to do was argue that it went against the Denny Motion, and done. The evidence was never introduced in court. They had a private investigator that investigated all of this stuff, but none of that evidence was admissible in court. None. Not a bit of it. So again, the jury had no idea what was going on, what was truly happening. Now, another thing that Strang and Buting were dealing with was the fact that Kratz was delaying discovery for as long as he possibly could. Why would you feel the need to do that, Kratz? If your case is so open and shut as you want everybody to fucking believe, why, oh why, would you feel the need to delay discovery? Now, kids, let me explain what discovery is. Discovery is the process during the pre-trial, during the time between the charging of the crime and the trial. Discovery is going on. What that means is that both sides are exchanging what evidence and information they have to make this as fair of a trial as possible. So the prosecution isn't allowed any surprises, and neither is the defense. Okay? So the prosecution has to hand over everything to the defense, and vice versa. You can talk to their witnesses, you can see all of their evidence, everything. And that's called discovery. But Kratz kept delaying discovery. They had to file repeated motions for discovery and threats of sanctions if discovery was not adhered to. So that's another thing that Strang and Buting were dealing with. And then, as if that wasn't enough, as if this clusterfuck was not completely greasy as it was, it gets even better. The change of venue was completely fucking useless. They changed venue from Manitowoc County to Calumet County, which I still don't fucking understand, because despite the fact that there was a change of venue and the trial was taken from Manitowoc to Calumet County, the jury was taken from Manitowoc, which makes no sense. It renders the fucking point of change of venue completely useless. But changing venue was going to be completely useless regardless because of Kratz's press conference. Kratz's press conference was broadcast throughout the entire state of Wisconsin. There was no way that Stephen Avery was going to get a fair trial at all. The jury pool had been effectively poisoned. He might as well have taken a cow, slit its throat, and dumped it into a lake. That's exactly how that happened. He poisoned the jury pool to the point where there was no way that Stephen Avery was going to get a fair shake in Wisconsin. None at all. And the problem is people will say, well, then they should have taken it to another state. Maybe. But the fact is that that is not a possibility. Now, in a federal crime, it's a possibility. You can file for change of venue, take it to a totally different state. But this was a state-level crime, which means it had to be tried in the state of Wisconsin. So, regardless of whether or not it could be typified as fair, the fact is that there was no way that Stephen Avery was going to get a fair trial because any jury pool that they pulled from, any county in Wisconsin was already poisoned by Kratz's press conference. And that press conference was calculated because Kratz knew that the only way that he was going to get Stephen Avery's ass behind bars for the rest of his fucking life was to stack the deck in his favor. Now, here's my question to you kids. If Stephen Avery is truly guilty, why all the shady dealings by the DA? Fuck the investigation. Why all the shady dealings from the DA? Why did Kratz file the Denny Motion if it was such a slam dunk case? Why did Kratz do the press conference and poison the jury pool? I have never seen a press conference like that in any case ever in modern times. What's the point of that? And why would Kratz make the discovery process so difficult if it was such a slam dunk case and they had oh so much evidence? The answer to that question, kids, is that Stephen Avery is not guilty. He was never guilty, and he never will be guilty. Kratz had to stack the deck because he knew, and has admitted, running a completely circumstantial forensic case. So, when you sit there and you watch these videos or you see this little piece of evidence, don't ask yourself, why didn't Strang and Buting bring that up in court? The answer to that is 2 words. Denny Motion. They were not allowed to bring it up in court, kids. And Kratz, even if it wasn't covered by the Denny Motion, Kratz would object citing the Denny Motion, and Willis would sustain the objection. Strang and Buting's hands were completely tied. They did a phenomenal job defending their client. They did an amazing job. But the fact is that the deck was stacked against them from before they were even retained. And why? Simple. Calumet County and Manitowoc County both knew that Stephen Avery was not guilty of this crime. They knew it. But they had to stack the deck because there wasn't anything in the deck to stack. So from here on out, kids, when you see a piece of evidence that's really juicy or really good or could have set Stephen Avery free during the initial trial, try to remember the Denny Motion. The fact that there was no way that any evidence that it was anybody other than Stephen Avery was going to be heard in court. And even if it wasn't evidence that it wasn't Stephen Avery, even if it was just the confirming of his alibi, all Kratz had to do was cite the Denny Motion and Willis would sustain it. Read through the court transcripts and count how many times Kratz cites the Denny Motion and you'll see I'm right. All right, kids. Well, don't forget to subscribe to us here on YouTube. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Mama Phoenix 6, or you can follow Clue TV at Clue TV Official on Twitter, and boogie on down to our fan page at Clue TV Official on Facebook. Thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you soon.